Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we're going to be looking at the overarching meanings, messages and methods as put forward by Keats in Sonnet on the Sea. Now before I go any further, I'd like to encourage you to hit subscribe to join my tribe for all things English, literary and grammatical. So this particular poem was written in the Isle of Wight in April 1817. Now on the 17th of April he writes to his friend, John Hamilton Reynolds, and Keats encloses a copy of the poem and these words. He says he has been haunted with the passage in Lear, and then he offers the line he's referring to. Do you not hear the sea? Now, that line comes from Act 4, Scene 6 of King Lear, and it focuses in on the Earl of Gloucester. Now I'm going to do a few spoilers for you about what this means. Now the Earl of Gloucester at this point in the play has tragically had his eyes gouged out. He cannot see, and he is led by his son, who he doesn't realise is his son at this point because he has lost his eyes, and his son is doing a different voice, and his son is trying to comfort his father. He's telling him that he is by the sea and on a cliff walk that's incredibly dangerous because they're so close to the edge, when in reality they are both walking in the middle of a field. Gloucester's instincts are not easily convinced he is by the sea, but because he cannot see for himself, he goes along with it. So there's two things at play here. In true Keats fashion, there is this exploration of something with melancholy at the heart of it. There's this troubled and tormented soul that could be the poetic voice, but more broadly thinks about the way in which we live in the moment and how there are infinite consequences. As we examine this poem, let's get into it, and I'd love you to write down below in the comments what your views are on this sonnet. Why is it crafted in this fashion? In order to do that, let's get reading it. It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores, and with its mighty swell gluts twice 10,000 caverns, till the spell of Hecate leaves them their old shadowy sound. Often 'tis in such gentle temper found, that scarcely will the very smallest shell be moved for the days from whence sometime fell, when last the winds of heaven were unbound. O yea, who have your eyeballs vexed and tired, feast them upon the wideness of the sea. O yea, whose ears are dinned with rude uproar, or fed too much with cloying melody, sit ye near some old cavern's mouth, and brood until ye start, as if the sea nymphs quired. The first observation we can take from the opening line and across this poem is the absence of the first person. It accentuates distance, it shows the tormented state of affairs, but it's also incredibly abrupt. The opening line, it keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores. The personification of the waves through whisperings draws parallels to the human experience, and the sense of trouble is amplified further in the second line when we're shown the desolate shores. Desolate echoing that really clear resonance with other works by Keats. Melancholy within that. And it's interesting that within those first two lines, there are whisperings that are eternal from the waves and the sea, but they range from eternal whisperings to a mighty swell. And that's quite the transformation from something that's just whirring in the background to something that seems like a force of nature that could do so much. When we get its mighty swell gluts. Gluts is the abbreviation of gluttony, and it's onomatopoeic too, alongside swell and whisperings. And it suggests that the sea is greedy to devour the caverns. Now, on some level, the idea that you would be so keen to gorge yourself on the coastal caverns as the sea, it's taking in water, it's it seems to me through the capitalisation of caverns that this is more than just literal sea. This might be representing every craggy rock in the world beyond our human control. Maybe the caverns represent every single struggle that goes beyond what we can control when the mighty swell gluts out and attacks. And then we see, as we move through to the end of line 3, the enjambment that leads us on to line 4, the spell of Hecate. Now, Hecate is the Greek goddess of witchcraft, magic, and controlling the moon. And it's not a surprise that the tides have abated the caves that are left with this sound of what we're told later in line 4 is the shadowy sound. But the power of the spell of Hecate as the goddess of witchcraft, it makes sense that the spell means she can control the tide of the waves. We're definitely understanding the power of nature. And as if that wasn't enough, the enjambment and sentence structure that we meet across this sonnet mirrors the waves and tide. It heightens the intensity of the poem's focus on the sea and shows the onward journey going in and out. And even visually looking at it, you can see some of that tidal effect, if you like, in the way the lines are spaced out. As if that wasn't enough, when reading this poem, you can't help but acknowledge the power of the sibilance of shadowy sounds. There's onomatopoeic power, as I've already recognised with you, of whispering swell. And that constant sound constantly shows us the mirroring power of the sea in every sound we hear. It's very typical of Keats's poetry to be truly engaging our senses. Now, as we move through to the line that begins, that scarcely will the very smallest shell be moved for days from whence it sometime fell, we're now getting the parallel. The parallel that the sea is a constant natural force. It's eternal, as the opening line suggests. And actually, this replication of what the sea's power looks like goes right down to the smallest shell, which mirrors a cave. And it's this idea that the shell is a mini version of the cave in shape. It's delicate, but it's able to withstand the difficult conditions that the sea puts it through. And it's this idea that actually, on some level, we can't help but understand that fell, nature has more power than we ever could. And we get that at the end of line 7. Not quite a volta, but a caesura nonetheless. And it's building up to the actual caesura at the end of line 8, when last the winds of heaven were unbound. Now, that image of the winds of heaven being unbound contrasts to calm, really, as if nature is reigned over by a heavenly force to produce a storm that can shift shells and rocks and waves and shift, dare I say it, human struggles. And it's really crucial that that caesura is there at the end of the octave. As you know, the octave in a Petrarchan sonnet lays out the problem of the poem, and the sestet often seeks out to solve the problem. Now, as we encounter this next section of the poem in the sestet, we see the solution unfold. We get the repetition of "oh yea" twice in the sestet, and it's an anaphoric salutation in some respects. It's greeting us as a listener who's unnamed. "Oh yea, who have your eyeballs vexed and tired." Now, there's two things to acknowledge here. At this point, Keats is training to be a doctor and will have very much been aware of the struggles of the social conditions that people were living in and the squalid conditions that others, less fortunate even than he, would be. But equally, those ideas of being angered and tired, they echo the pressures of life. And as if that wasn't enough, we often say the eyes are the window to the soul. If your soul is vexed and tired, that implies that you need to be healed. And that's where the sea saves the day. The next line tells us, feast them upon the wideness of the sea. Feast, again, another acknowledgement of the way in which this lexical field of eating can solve the struggle of the sea. The sea is healing the human struggles. And I think the reference to the wideness of the sea is this notion that it's wide to be pervasive in us. It is constantly present. You can't escape it. It can support you through anything. And the capitalisation sea, it's quite significant. This implies again that we're not dealing with the literal sea, but the metaphorical, abstract idea of the sea. And if this is the case, well, perhaps this links to Plato's theory of forms. In that theory, Plato is acknowledging that, well, the world is not as timeless as the ideas that we think. The world is eventually going to change, but ideas, whilst they might change in your mind, the construction of the idea, the abstract idea, has power. Now, when we get the repeat of "oh yea" again, we get another awareness point of the human struggle with another sense attached to it. Before it was the eyes, and now it's the ears. The ears that are dinned, that's troubled with the uproar rude, or fed too much with cloying melody. Now, whether it's uproar or cloying melody, both of those sounds do damage. Whether it's something that's too rowdy or makes life difficult, or frankly, false sweetness, people telling you things they don't genuinely believe. These are struggles that we face. And again, fed too much, another lexical acknowledgement in the form of eating that we need to find sanctuary. And the sanctuary comes in the form of the final two lines. Sit ye near some old cavern's mouth. So the therapy that's suggested by our doctor is that we find universal sanctuary at some old cavern's mouth. So by the edge of the caves, waiting and watching the sea at work. So this is for the weary. And it's as if we're learning more about what it is to be weary. The notion of brood, and brood until you start. Brood is this unexpected trouble that's gnawing away at you. You're not content. And then there's a sense of resolution in that final line, as if the sea nymphs choired. Now, choired is this idea of the harmonious singing of a choir. And the reference to sea nymphs fuels this power of the sea to solve our struggles. Once more, we note that the sea is feminized. It's presented as feminine, with reference to a Greek goddess who controls it, and female creatures like sea nymphs. This is another repeated idea that the Romantics often pay homage to nature, Mother Nature. They feminize and glorify the calming powers of nature and make them feminine to glorify the beauty of it. Now, if this is all aesthetic or does hold metaphorical meaning, this poem is a gateway into understanding the troubled mind of Keats. I urge you to comment down below your thoughts on this sonnet, and I hope it's been of help. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?